Thank you, Philip. Hello, my name is Alyse Piburn. Thanks again for having me today. It's nice to meet you finally, Philip, and thank you, Dee Dee, for connecting us. So I am owner of Mountain Roots based out of Frisco. We specialize in a sustainable style of perennial and annual garden design, installation and maintenance. We have several properties around the county, and we are entering into our 10th season this summer. Today we just wanted to get together, and I wanted to put together a class that could hopefully benefit everybody, regardless of what your gardening experience is, whether you're already have all the answers in a beautiful garden or you're just starting out. Hopefully you can take something from today's talk and apply it to your life somehow. So we're gonna just kind of get started with a little bit more about myself and my background, some of the benefits of gardening, and both physical and mental. And then we'll kind of hop into those basic topics like plant selection, soil choices, maintenance plans, and again, leaving some time at the end for those specific questions you may have. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up, we've got a combination of some written content and photos, and then I'll also be speaking, of course. So I'm going to pull this up here. All right. All right, so can everybody just see here? We got the basics of high altitude gardening.
It looks great.
Perfect. All right, so just a little bit more about me so you can kind of know my background. I am a Colorado native. I have been in Summit County for just about 20 years. Like many of you, I came for skiing and snowboarding, biking, hiking, just a real love for the outdoors. And, just ended up, unable to leave. So I studied horticulture and landscape technologies in Fort Collins. So I do have a little bit of formal training. And then, when I think about when my gardening experiences really started or where that inspiration comes from, it truly is, I think, a little bit in my blood. Wandering through the tall bearded iris patches at my grandmother Dorothy's house in Longmont, picking a ripe tomato off a tomato plant in Boulder at Grandma Kay's, and then actually starting to take care of gardens and doing landscaping with my mother in Grand Lake, Colorado. So really just a combination of being around a lot of people who loved flowers and plants, being outside, it just kind of all clicked for me. So starting in 2011, I did start Mountain Roots. And again, I created the company with a sustainable business mindset. What that means to me in the garden and landscape industry is really, focusing on a natural and chemical-free gardening style. Really focusing on choosing the right plant and putting it in the right place, kind of mimicking nature and using a lot of natives. Water conservation. We're currently Colorado, the whole state of Colorado, 98% of the state of Colorado is currently at some level of drought. So really kind of thinking about our use of water and still creating a beautiful garden or landscape. Food growth, lowering our carbon footprint. What can we grow here locally to supplement your family's food intake over the summer. Participating in the local composting program. All of our plant waste and debris is taken to the Summit County landfill. They do all the dirty work, turn it back into compost. We pick it back up and bring it to your garden. We're keeping stuff out of the landfill, avoiding plastic bags, and again, using that product in another way. Supporting local growers and businesses, keeping our money in the community. This is all, a sustainable way to create a better future. I'm also passionate about just kind of sharing my knowledge and learnings with the community. So this was a great fit for me. I've also worked with the traumatic brain injury support group. I have an upcoming class with Building Hope, which focuses on mental health. And then a lot of stuff just through my website and blog and social media, really trying to get other people excited about plants and gardening. Let's see here. So, when we get into the talk here, whether we're talking about what kind of container to use, what soil to use, what's the right plant for you, just kind of think about that inspiration. Maybe you're just wanting to have a corner in your house for house plants. Maybe you'd like to try growing a couple vegetable crops for your family. You have an apartment or condo and you're looking to kind of spruce it up with containers, really kind of personalizing your own horticulture experience. So here I am in my first garden here on the left. For many years, I thought I was maybe cutting things, but it looks like I think my mom was actually having me deadhead for her. And here on the right, I'm in my cutting garden here in Frisco. So really just something that I've kind of been around my whole life. I'm a perennial gardener at heart. There's something very special about the whole process of watching the plants wake up in the spring, kind of participating in the changes from season to season, seeing what likes what area, what needs to be moved, adding and removing, dividing plants to share with your friends. So really that is, where my heart lays, is kind of with a perennial garden. All right, so first I'm going to just talk briefly about, why should you garden? There's a lot of benefits, both physical and mental, that have been studied recently. And we're just going to touch on that for a minute. So studies have shown that during various stress tests, the garden group, or the group that was spent time in the garden, showed a lower level of cortisol. And this is the stress hormone. It's also been linked to heart disease, obesity, memory loss, learning problems. The gardening group receiving that vitamin D and fresh air was also overall just in a better mood, less anxiety, less stress and depression, and an increase in self-esteem. I did it. I grew something from seed. Studies also have shown that with this repetition, there's a less chance to develop dementia. You're getting outside, you're taking care of something, you're building some strength in your hands, working on your balance, getting that exercise. And it's also a bit of a social interaction. If you have friends around, or possibly you're working out of a community garden. So a lot of great benefits. There's actually a beneficial bacteria, and I can never figure out how to say this, but Mycosyrdium vaccae, that's found in soil. So an actual bacteria in the soil that has also been shown to be favorable. It's going to connect with your immune cells, it discourages inflammation, and expands your adaptation to stress. So when I'm speaking with the traumatic brain injury group. I'm actually also a member of that group. I have a traumatic brain injury. There's certain things with science and gardening that can truly benefit you. Even just with houseplants and inside your home, whether it's your home or your office, workspace, I know a lot of that's the same thing right now, but you're going to find a air purification, an increase in oxygen levels. One office with no plants versus one office with plants, they're going to have a better mood. They're going to be more productive and creative. Again, just a lot of benefits to your mental health, less stress and depression. It's something to watch and observe and look forward to. It actually also helps enhance your immune system. So, again, just, trying to motivate people. Here's like some science and some reasonings behind getting into gardening and plants. And what does that look like for you personally in your life where you are right now? So we're going to briefly, again, this is just kind of the basics of high altitude gardening. I could go off on any of these topics for a lot more in depth, but we just kind of want to touch on a few topics here today, including using containers and raised beds, some soil choices, plant selection. Through there, I'm going to talk about vegetable seeds and then a little bit of the pros and cons and differences between annuals and perennials. Some maintenance plans for you, anticipating pests, and then again, some time at the end there for questions. So container gardens are great for small spaces. If you have a condo, an apartment, maybe you just have a deck you're working with. They're easy to find. There's a lot of options and varieties available, and you can also personalize your space and consider factors like physical restrictions. Maybe you need something that is, along a railing so you're not bending over. Maybe, you're unable to reach up high. So, it's just really a lot of great options to personalize that for your area. When we talk about a raised bed, a lot of times this is specifically for like a vegetable garden. I use the same kind of setup for my cutting garden. But again, a lot of the same principles you could bring to maybe a raised rock garden or kind of bringing things up out of the ground. So some of the benefits of that, you're going to have a lot better drainage, less soil compaction, fewer weeds, and again, minimal bending, raised up off the ground. And I'll show you some examples of how you can really personalize that. It can be built out of several different things, rot resistant wood, rocks, straw. I found an old frame on the side of the road, filled it with soil, and it's a garden now. You can also kind of extend your season with a simple covering. If you have a simple covering, you're going to be able to start your season a little bit earlier, and you'll be able to prolong it into the fall a little bit longer. So again, just getting a longer growing season. Definitely think about your sun exposure, your water sources, and irrigation options anytime you're planning your garden, whether that's in a raised bed or container or in the ground. Do you want to be hauling the hose around the side of the house? Is there a spigot close by? How much? I'm getting 6 hours of sun each day over here, but only 2 in the back on the east facing side of the house. So again, just kind of being aware of those differences. Another great option for people in the community, if you do not have the space to have your own garden, We have a wonderful community garden program. Breckenridge, Frisco, Silverthorne, Dillon. You can rent a plot there. Great place to be social and learn about gardening and kind of just dabble and get started. And you're going to just reach out to High Country Conservation if you're interested in that. So just a couple examples here. This is just going to be kind of a basic vegetable raised garden bed. Again, it's raised off the ground. That soil is going to heat up a lot quicker and sooner than the soil in the ground, giving you a little bit of extra time. You have a little bit more control over the soil and growing media, less bending. You can really personalize it based off of where you live, whether you have deer, moose, rabbit. This is more of a, complicated structure, but I'm sure it was worth the work they put into it. Here's some examples of those simple covered beds. Just poly tube over here. And then, this one actually opens and closes. Again, the benefit of this is you're extending your growing season. It does require a little bit, once the summer hits and it's warm enough, I leave mine completely open. Otherwise, you're gonna be opening and closing them a lot. These things heat up really quickly, but they are great in the spring and fall just to give you a little bit of extra protection and heat. Again, this one on the right, it looks like you're not bending over at all. You're able to harvest everything right there. A little simple cold frame. You can really get creative with your raised bed or container garden. Here we see some great use of height for a smaller space. Again, this doesn't all need to be vegetables and herbs. This would be a really pretty cascading flower garden. But again, you're working up instead of out, just lots of different options. So again, you don't need a whole lot of space to kind of get started. Here again, we see just a very small space. She's using the raised bed for her vegetables, some whiskey barrels, the height up here for hanging, and then, some stuff crawling up this way. Again, just using the height, the space, getting creative. This isn't a big area. Window boxes. Here's just a simple couple arrangements I made at my house with houseplants and succulents. Just a good use of space here on the wall. And, you can really get creative with the containers that you're using. A lot of great options. All right, so moving on to soil. This really is almost important as anything else in often if we're thinking about starting a new garden or redesigning a new garden, we're probably going to spend a little bit of time at the beginning just to enhance the soil before we even start to think about plants. So we're just going to talk a little bit. So for container gardening, I would recommend an organic potting soil. You're going to hear me touch on this a few times, but again, we're going to try and, support local businesses here in the community. They've all had a rough year. That shouldn't be the reason we're doing it, but again, maybe paying a little bit more for a higher quality product, and again, supporting a local business and some local jobs. I like Happy Frog and Black and Gold brands. Again, if you're putting the money into buying a nice organic potting soil, I actually use the same soil for about 3 seasons. You don't need to throw it out and start over. You may want to do a little bit of a mix each season. half of the old soil and half of a little bit new, mix it together. But it's good soil and it will last for a few seasons. Hydro Shack here in Frisco has a great selection of soils and fertilizers. We've got Alpine Gardens and Silverthorn. Again, just buying a quality soil to start. So switching over to possibly a raised bed or a ground garden, we're going to approach that a little bit differently. That's going to be more of like a topsoil and compost blend. Topsoil is going to be different than potting soil. It's going to be more like our native soil here. And then the compost is just there to kind of enhance that and amend that with nutrients, help with drainage, deter pests and disease. And that's just kind of what we're growing, and those things prefer other than the potting soil. If you already have a ground garden, existing trees, shrubs, you can even do this on your turf area. You're just gonna top dress it with that locally made compost. I do it every year. You can do it either in the spring or fall. If it happens every other year, great, but that is really an important part of our maintenance program. Again, this compost is just going to help enhance that soil with nutrients, help with drainage issues and erosion, and really just kind of give everything that boost that it needs. You want to also think of it as just enhancing the native soil. If you're using the right plants in the right location, they should be able to thrive in our soils, as opposed to, putting them in a location they wouldn't like. So just one more touch about that compost program at the landfill. So, there's a free food waste program in the community. So members of the community are collecting food scraps. Restaurants are collecting food scraps. Landscapers are dropping off plant material. They're doing all the dirty work and making the compost for us. Anyone can purchase this compost. You can show up with a truck. It's about $30 for a whole yard, so a whole truck full. That covers a pretty big area. You can bring some buckets there and just pay by weight. They have burlap bags full available for you. So, that's something that's available for everybody here in the community. All right, moving on to plant selection. I'm just going to talk about kind of an important date here in Summit County. And that is called the average last frost date. And you'll hear that a lot when you're seeding vegetables or thinking about planting time, or when it's safe to put out your tender annuals. Up here, it is right around mid-June or Father's Day. We are about a month behind Denver and the Front Range and, other areas of the country. But mid-June is kind of that time that we kind of schedule and plan everything around. This is just a guideline. It can fluctuate every year. Some years, maybe, you check the weather at the beginning of June and it looks good to go, and you go ahead and put out your tender annuals and start planting. Some years, like last year, it snows at the end of June and you're racing around and pulling everything inside and covering it up. So it's a good idea to just kind of keep an eye on that. But when we're talking about scheduling our seeds or when it's safe to plant, mid-June is going to be that date for us. If you're jonesing to get something going or get out in your garden, pansies and violas are a great option right now. They can handle the frost, they can handle the snow. And then you can also start seeding your vegetable garden now that we're about 4 to 6 weeks out ahead of the last frost date. again, so we're looking at a pretty short growing season up here, which is, one of the issues that make it a little bit more challenging. We're basically looking at mid-June to mid-September. Every year is going to be a little bit different, but all in all, that's about a short 90-day growing season. If you Google how many days in Summit County we have that are frost free, I think it says something like 12. Like, it's very, very short season for us. So that's kind of that, again, a little bit of a guideline when we're choosing specifically our vegetable seed crops to grow up here. I'm going to pull up an example of just our seed packets here, but just a little bit about starting your vegetable gardens. Your seed packet should give you all the instructions and timing for when to start your seeds inside or outside. Again, every area is different. If the packet says start inside 4 weeks before your average last frost, that would be mid-May, 4 weeks before mid-June. You're going to choose crops with less than 90 days to maturity. I'm not going to probably grow a hot serrano pepper that takes 110 days to mature. Maybe if you have a greenhouse or a covered bed, that would be a good option. But, sticking to maybe the 70 to 80 day crops is going to be a little bit safer for our area. This is just kind of my go-to vegetable crop list. Think about what you like to eat, what your family likes to eat. But these are all going to be low day to maturity crops that like our colder climate and our short growing season. So I'm typically growing lettuce, spinach, kale, snap peas, radishes, carrots, beets, cherry tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, potato, onion, and then a mix of some sort of herb. So I'm just going to kind of go over this.
Alyse, real quick before you move on from plant selection, we did have a question. What would be a good question on plant selection? What would be a nice thing to plant at a grave site that would get by maybe during the growing season with little to no care?
That is a good question. Just off the top of my head, a Maltese cross could be nice. Columbine get pretty high. I'd probably avoid something too high that you need to stake, although it could use a little bit of the support of the grave site there. You could seed like a Cosmo or something like that. I guess I would think about too, what time of year you want it to bloom, because that's kind of where things get a little bit more complicated. A tall bearded iris would be nice. A white blooming lilac could be nice. That's going to be more of like a woody shrub. But yeah, or if there's a favorite color of the person that you're trying to remember, that would be a good place to start as well. So if you, Veronica, get pretty tall. Lots of stuff.
Okay, thanks. Those are all really good suggestions. I think that's really helpful.
Okay. And we'll get into a little bit more of the flowers here in a minute. You might see something in the photos that catches your eye and I can tell you what it is. So again, I just want to go over real quickly, just kind of like a basic seed packet. This is Botanical Interest, a great Colorado company, a lot of good organic and GMO-free varieties. What I'm looking at here, one, it says frost tolerant. Whoop. They don't always say that, but that's a good indicator. It might go well here. 48 days to maturity. Sounds pretty good. That's less than our 90. That would be a good choice. Over here, I'm gonna first kind of look at, its planting suggestions. Every seed and every crop is different. Um, but it's going to basically ask you, tell you when to start inside versus directly sowing outside, and then whether it has a recommendation one way or the other. So, again, this is recommending that we start inside 4 to 6 weeks before our average last frost date. So, basically anytime in May you could get these started. If you wanted to skip the extra work and just do everything outside directly, then I would just focus on these instructions here. Um, Again, it's going to give you your seed planting depth, what your spacing looks like, when to thin, and any sort of like harvesting or special instructions. Everything you need right there on the seed packet. So just some photos of our veggies here that we grow. Snap peas. Again, I wouldn't probably dabble with cherry tomatoes too much unless you have some sort of covered bed or greenhouse situation. You can also put them in a separate pot and be very ambitious and bring them in on cold nights, but how much, of that do you want to do? And again, back to this, some benefits of shopping local. Local garden centers and nurseries, first of all, are going to have plants that are hardy and work well in our climate. A lot of the big box stores may have cheaper plants, but they're just sending a standard plant list that's used all around the country. And a lot of the perennials will not survive here. I don't think it's worth saving a few extra bucks. A lot of times those plants are treated with harmful chemicals. Again, just supporting your local Colorado growers and keeping your money in the community. Mountain grown gardens in Alma is great. They do a lot of their stuff from seed as well. Beautiful hanging baskets. It's definitely worth the drive. Alpine Gardens in Niels Lunsford and Silverthorne, and then also the Dillon Farmers Market. All great options for your plant shopping. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the benefits and difference between an annual and perennial flower. Again, some of this may be redundant for some of you, but our annual crops are just going to last for one season. Some of those can reseed better than others, dropping their seeds and creating a new plant for the next season. Bachelor button, California poppies, pansies, violas, those are all technically one season plant, but if they're in the right location, they'll drop their seeds and spread around for you. Annuals provide kind of instant and ongoing color for the whole season, which is going to be a little bit different than your perennial flowers. They are a little bit more tender to the cold and frost. That's why we put them out in mid-June, and when they die in September, October, we're done with them. Again, there's a few exceptions. Pansies and violas can pretty much handle anything. They're great for hanging baskets, containers, and then also kind of filling in your garden for a little bit of instant color. Really, the only thing to think about when choosing your annuals is your sun exposure. Are you in a sunny location? Is it shady on that side? Choosing a plant that will thrive where you're going to put it. A little bit about the growth habit. The thriller, filler, spiller method has been around for quite some time. Do you want the plant to grow upright? Is it the thriller and the star of the show? Do you want it to kind of spill over the edge and cascade down? Or do you want it to kind of fill in the cracks and gaps between? And again, your plant tag at the nursery should give you most of this information. full sun, part sun, cascading habit, gets to this tall. You know, reading those tags is very helpful. And then it's just really, what colors do you like? What stands out to you? You know, that's what I think about when choosing my annuals. Again, this is just a super short list. There's tons of varieties and lots of options. But your pansies, violas, petunias, geraniums, calibrachoa, verbena, alyssum, lobelia, osteospermum, salvia, and then a lot of your veggies and herb starts are also just annual one season crops. So here we just see, you know, some various containers and annual gardens. Again, you know, the thriller here, this is kind of spilling over the edge, and this grass could be kind of the filler, just kind of for a little bit of soft texture. Again, you know, what colors stand out to you? What combinations do you like? You can just kind of really get creative and go from there. I'm, for some reason, always drawn to the darker flowers, but that's just me. So for your perennial crops, again, these are going to go dormant over the winter and then come back. Some forever, some for 3 to 5 years. Everything's a little bit different, but this is kind of more of your long-term garden for the future. Again, when you're thinking of a perennial garden, patience is very important. If you're looking for more of that instant gratification, a perennial garden might not be the best option for you. You know, patience for several seasons for things to mature. It's very often a one and done project. You're constantly adding, changing things, and it really is a work in progress. One of the big differences between perennials and annuals as well is their bloom cycle. Most perennials only bloom for about 4 to 6 weeks as opposed to the entire summer. So when planning or designing your garden, you do want to kind of think about using a combination of spring, summer, and fall blooming flowers. So you kind of always have something going on. You know, that can be a little bit tricky up here. Think about what time you do spend in Summit County. If you're a full-time resident, then you would want to use spring bloomers, summer bloomers, fall bloomers, and kind of combine those together. If you're only here in July and August, maybe you kind of focus on those summer bloomers and not really worry about spring and fall. When we talk about gardening zones, this is going to be what indicates how hardy a plant is, and you know, if it will overwinter here and survive and come back. Technically, I think we're called zone 4B now. You know, this can fluctuate whether you live in Blue River or north of Silverthorne, in town or up on a hill. But typically you're going to be looking for plants between zone 2 and 5. Again, these local gardens and nursery centers should already be stocking with those plants anyways. And you can fluctuate that a little bit if it's a protected area of your garden. Maybe then you try a zone 5 just to kind of see if you can keep it going. Over time, with proper maintenance and cares, perennial gardens actually require less water and resources. Again, maybe a little bit more money and work up front, but eventually this garden is, you know, kind of doing its own thing. And then again, just kind of being patient and letting things evolve, and it can take several seasons to get there. And again, you're just going to kind of use that combination of tall, upright bloomers, kind of more medium mounding or fillers for textures, and then you have kind of your low ground covers. Again, thinking about the right plant in the right place, making sure that it's hardy to zone 2 to 4. Make sure that, you're getting a sunny plant for your sunny area and a shady plant for the shade garden. I think a lot of people are intimidated or scared of those shady gardens. But really most often it's just not the right place for that exposure or the right plant for that exposure. So, again, focusing on the right plant for the right place. And again, there's tons of perennials that live up here, and each of these types have a ton of varieties. But here's just kind of a standard list of things that we use. So again, just kind of showing you the different stages, starting in spring. We use a lot of tulips and daffodils, hyacinth. Again, maybe, thinking about if you're not in Summit County in May, you might not need to worry about this. We can just skip this round. Forget-me-nots, the tulips. If you have a lot of deer and elk, maybe just stick to the daffodil. Then we're gonna kind of, as the bulbs teeter out, kind of transition over to the columbines and into the more of the summer garden. We've got some tall monkshood, some of the low sedum, some phlox here in between. Tall daisies back here, just kind of using that height and space in different ways. Again, you don't need a lot of space. This is a very small garden. We've got a couple shrubs. This is Rocky Mountain penstemon. This is a very easy to grow, low maintenance, doesn't need much water. That might be a good option for that grave site. This is a perennial variety of a geranium, wild geranium. This is again an example of a shade garden. So again, not making sure you're using the right plant in the right place. What I love about shade gardens, just kind of the leafy textures. You might not be getting as much of an abundant bloom, but some really fun options with your leaf coloring. These plants wouldn't like it though necessarily in your full sun garden, and vice versa. Yarrow, this is another really easy, low water, low maintenance, comes in several varieties. You've got your terracotta, red, pinks, whites, yellows, lots of great options. Again, not a lot of space here, very small garden. This is just, about 7 plants. This is a wild geranium, Denver gold columbine, couple peonies. And then this garden looks completely different in the spring and fall. This is the summer version. Delphinium, beautiful, nice and tall, lots of varieties. It is going to require some staking and a little bit more care, unless you have it kind of up against a wall or somewhere where you can support that. And then we're moving into kind of the fall garden here. The yellows, the reds, the golds, deep pinks. And just kind of giving it a little bit of interest each time of year. So just real briefly, here's just like some basic maintenance tips for your perennial gardens. I know we already touched on this a few times because I think it's very, very important. In a heavily planted garden, I use the compost every year, 2 to 3 inches right on top of the soil. And then if you have enough flowers, you don't even need the mulch. This also will help kind of retain your moisture and do those other things for you while providing those nutrients and that extra boost. Another thing that is very important I think just with the increasing of warm temperatures and our drought conditions, Breckenridge is already on water restriction. I think that sooner than later we all will be. So training your gardens to adapt to that now and learn how to live with that will be better than just turning it off eventually. So again, giving your gardens, 3 deep soaks a week as opposed to a little bit of a drink every day. I'm really soaking the gardens, encouraging deep root growth, and then letting the plant grow out, dry out in between and feel what that feels like to not be watered every single day. So, 30 to 45-minute soaks a week as opposed to a 10-minute watering every day is going to be huge because eventually you will only be allowed to water 3 days a week. Maybe putting a rain barrel on your property. Yes, there's some pressure issues. The water can be a little bit dirty. I don't use this on my vegetable garden, but I can pull out the hose and let it slowly soak my trees, shrubs, and perennials. I think a lot of time people say, well, what's the point of a rain barrel if we are in a drought? But I tell you what, if we get a good rain, for one, I'm not watering anything for 3-4 days. And 2, my rain barrel is full, giving me at least another watering cycle the following week. So it does pay off. Again, here we see a great photo. This isn't the finished compost that you would buy, but again, just showing here's all this plant debris, what we're turning it into. And this is just my very simple rain barrel off of a water spigot. Here's just a couple photos of one of my front gardens here in Frisco. It's about 6 or 7 years old, give or take. Some stuff's older than not. I water probably twice a week, 2 good soaks. And if we get a good rain, like a decent rain, that counts as one of the 2 waterings. So again, I'm training those plants to kind of survive without that constant water. A couple other examples. This here on the left is a slope garden in Breckenridge, a very big sloped garden that gets 3 deep soaks a week. So again, these plants are trained to adapt to that. You're going to use an organic granular fertilizer once a month. I like all-purpose, you're going to look for an all-purpose. The 3 numbers on the bag should say 555, maybe 363, but really close. Those are just different nutrients in the fertilizer. Happy Frog and Biosol are a good brand. Avoiding those harmful chemicals for weed control, just pulling the weeds yourself. If you are going to use a mulch to kind of retain moisture and deter weeds, use a natural undyed mulch. You don't really want to be adding more chemicals to your garden. Also keep that at just 2 inches max. A lot of times, we'll show up and there's 6 inches, 8 inches, a foot of mulch. Maybe that saves time over the long run, but you're just compacting your soil and it's not a good environment for growing your flowers. Again, thinking about tall plants that might need additional care, maintenance, the staking or netting, and then also what benefits from a deadheading, getting cut back, things like that. In the fall, a lot of time it's our first reaction to kind of cut the whole garden back and clean it up and tidy things up. That's great to a point, but I always am mindful to leave a few things upright. One, this is great, if it's a good seed head, the birds are going to eat it. Often pollinators are overwintering on these plants and just kind of being part of that ecosystem. So again, this is just an example of that organic fertilizer for the perennial gardens and some staking. For your annuals, again, I'm going to harp on that water conservation. If you're training those pots from the get-go, water them all the way through the bottom, and then, you know, not watering every day. Let them dry out a little bit in between. That's also going to help with pests and disease. You know, if you're training them handle that, they don't need the water every single day. Also, the bigger the pot you have, the less water the less often you will have to water. You know, maybe you're heading out of town, put the pot inside or somewhere shady. It's going to be better than baking out in the sun. For my annual crops, I'm going to use a liquid bloom formula every 1 to 2 weeks. And then again, kind of knowing there's a little bit of extra care for deadheading, like your petunias and verbena, and some crops don't need deadheading at all. Calibrachoa is a great alternative to the petunia. You just kind of shake them and the old blooms fall off. Again, these are all containers that we've trained to just be watered about 3 times a week, maybe 4 times if it's kind of in the heat of the summer in July, but just kind of watering all the way through and then letting them dry out in between. Here's that bloom fertilizer. You just put a couple tablespoons or just a little quick dip into your watering can and put it right on your pots. This one, the root rally on the right, I actually am going to use every time that I plant anything. Again, it's just going to give a little bit of extra boost to those roots. And again, these are both products you can get at Hydro Shack or one of your local nurseries. I know we're kind of getting to the end here and I want to definitely leave time for questions. I'm just going to breeze over this pest kind of section. I mean, obviously there's a lot of extra pests here. We are in the mountains, whether it's a vole or a chipmunk, maybe moose and bear are kind of my biggest pests that I deal with. But just kind of remember we're living in an ecosystem here. You know, picking and choosing when you're going to, you know, really fight off these pests. We're kind of just trying to live in harmony with everything. You know, focusing on these strong, healthy gardens is going to also help deter things like pests and disease, whether it's aphids or gnats, stuff like that, spider mites. And then you can think about stuff like companion planting. You know, marigolds in your vegetable garden are a great deterrent. Maybe you just have one sunflower plant where all the aphids hang out and they leave your lupin alone for the summer. You know, just kind of living in harmony and picking and choosing your battles. I have this long section on voles, which you can breeze over, or I think we're gonna send you guys this information as well. I don't have a 100% fix for voles. If somebody does, please let me know. I think you kind of have to battle them from different angles. But we just really ask that you don't poison them because we're thinking about the food system and what's going to eat that dead vole after it's been poisoned. Obviously, you don't want like your foundation to get messed up, or if they're coming and really causing problems, then just make sure that you're working with a certified licensed pest controller instead of just putting out the poison yourself. And here we go, just our little ecosystem. We got the baby moose, and then here's a little bird's nest I found in a flat of flowers in my greenhouse one summer, and I kind of gave that up to the birds and let them have that space. So yeah, and I'll just kind of end here with, you know, starting small, relax. It's a lot of trial and error. I don't have the answers. There's so many things out there that work and don't work, so many different plants, but really just kind of creating your own space and version of your horticulture therapy or experience. whether that's just like a hammock in the corner, a small reading space on your deck. Maybe it's just a house plant that you can enjoy over winter. So yeah. And then, yeah, here it's just, some of my happy places, but yeah, there's no gardening mistakes, just experiments. I will say I have a lot of other information relevant specifically for Summit County on my website, specifically in the blog section. If you are a user of Facebook or Instagram, a lot of hands-on videos and photos and information as well. So that's a great place to get in contact or get started.
Okay. I thank you so much, Alyse. Let's kick off our question session here. I wanted to first of all tell everyone that if you look in chat, so you go to the Zoom toolbar, I have put a link already to Alyse's blog, as well as to all of the slides that you just saw. You may have to scroll up to the top of chat because I didn't right at the beginning of the session, but those two links are there. So what I'm going to go ahead is I have two questions from chat, Alyse, although I'm going to go ahead and read them to you. The first one is, if a garden has weed cloth, will adding compost on top help? That sort of defeats the point of the weed cloth, I guess. So that's our first question.
So my personal opinion of weed cloth is that a garden is not the right place for that. If it's maybe a bed with just a few trees or shrubs, I think a lot of times, we are trying to focus on keeping the weeds out of our garden, but that weed cloth is kind of preventing things from growing and spreading and thriving naturally, while also deterring compacting your soil. So if removing the weed cloth isn't an option, then your best bet is to kind of find the crown of the plant where they're poking out of the holes and put a little bit of compost around that directly, as opposed to, I do think putting it over the weed barrier would defeat the purpose in that situation. You really want it to touch the plant's roots or soil system there.
Okay. Our next question was, how much water should established spruce trees be given by a drip system?
So that can be looked at differently, whether it's like gallons of water, whether it's time of watering. Do you have a sprinkler system? Are you using a hose? But again, I would kind of, with trees, shrubs, kind of think about the same guideline as a perennial garden, is giving it 2 to 3 really deep soaks a week. A lot of times they'll have kind of a basin at the bottom of the spruce tree. I would fill that up 2 or 3 times, let it really soak down, and then only do it twice a week, 3 times a week at max. But again, the
Okay.
deeper soak, less often.
Gotcha. Okay. So at this, we have another question here, I think. The solar, or maybe it's a comment. The solar rodent repeller you referred to in the slide about voles, is that the one that makes like all the vibrations? Like when it kind of vibrates every 5 minutes or so? I think I've seen them before. And the question is, do they actually work?
So, again, when I say like kind of battle it from a couple different ways, or not, having the right answer for how to get rid of voles, I do think they kind of help kind of maybe push them into a more naturalized area as opposed to your bed. But it wouldn't be my only place that I'd battle them. I would maybe have a couple of those along with maybe one of the spray repellents or granular repellents. So yes and no, they do work, but not 100%, but it certainly is helpful.
Okay. So are you saying maybe that those solar vibrators like maybe help keep them away, but if they're already in there, they're probably not going to leave?
Or maybe they would choose to be kind of in your grassy, naturalized area as opposed to your like prim and proper flower bed. Just kind of move them along. I'm just saying it's just not, unfortunately, not 100% success rate. I think if you have a cat or a snake or like a mountain lion you can borrow, that's honestly probably your best bet. But again, it's kind of like picking and choosing. Some years are just out of control. I think in the spring, we're very aware of voles because the snow is just melted and we're seeing all of their holes and damage from the winter. But, kind of allowing some time for their predators to show back up and for things to kind of balance out on their own. They seem to just eat my left bird seed and avoid my flowers. So there's kind of that debate. I'm letting them stay, but they're not eating the garden. So I don't know if I'm always open for any tips for voles or any cats that you want to let me borrow. So.
Okay. Well, if anyone has a mountain lion that they can allow us to borrow, I'd like to see that in the chat. The next question that we have, I need to irrigate my perennial garden. Is drip better than sprinkler heads? If so, wet spacing might be best.
What was the last part of the question, Philip?
Is drip better than sprinkler heads? And if so, what's the best spacing?
I think that drip, so you can actually have a drip system and use a drip sprayer as opposed to one little line to each plant. I think that overhead spraying for a highly planted garden is better than one little spray tube or drip tube to each plant. Again, how much time are you spending? There is a little bit more water wasted with evaporation. It's going to hit the leaves instead of the roots. If it's a garden with just 5 plants, absolutely go with the drip. If you have 200 flowers, I would just want to go with more of a sprayer, honestly, just to make things easier.
Okay, that makes sense. What is the best ground cover for shade or partial shade gardens?
Lamium is a great one. It can be a little, finicky if you're in Blue River. I maybe wouldn't do that, but here in, Frisco, Silverthorne, Lamium is good. I think that sedum ground covers grow in any condition up here very easily. Technically, they're a full sun plant, but I have them all over my shade garden. There's different varieties of thyme that would work in the shade. Moneywort, also known as Lysimachia, is another shade-loving ground cover.
We have, if everybody's watching chat, we have a couple of additional vole comments that are funny. But I want to stick to questions and make sure we get everybody's in. Is there anyone else who would like to unmute themselves and ask a question to Alyse directly, instead of having to go into the chat? Like, feel free to unmute yourself right now and ask a question. Anyone? Going once, going twice.
I have a question.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I've only been in Summit County 3.5 years, so I've had to relearn about landscaping, but we're talking about putting in a small greenhouse. And I just wondered, what can you grow and what's the growing season if you have a greenhouse?
Good question. Again, I use my greenhouse more of a season extender and also kind of a little bit warmer climate. I often get asked if it's something that I use throughout the winter or year round. I would just think about, heating and lights is a big kind of energy taker. Shoveling snow out to get to your greenhouse can be tricky. If you're able to build a structure that can withstand the snow and wind, it is something that you could possibly use year round. For me, it really is something that just gives me a head start. Maybe I'm able to get some containers or seeds going in April instead of, May or June, and then keep them a little bit protected further into October or November. Um, you know, I I use my greenhouse personally for a lot of just like my clients' plants and storage, but then personally, I'm growing the crops that I cannot grow, in my regular vegetable garden. That's where my cherry tomatoes, or if you had more of wanted to try peppers, eggplant, stuff that does need a little bit warmer climate and a little bit more time. But again, I've spent so much time shoveling the roof off of the greenhouse and shoveling to get out there. And, how are you heating that? And then as soon as it, um, you know, 10 in the morning, it's 90 degrees in there. So you have to open all the windows up. I personally think for more of just like a home gardener or something like that, doing like a simple covered bed or cold frame might be a better option if you're able to have the resources to kind of build a snow and wind resistant greenhouse. Just think about kind of heating. We don't get a lot of as much sun in the winter, so some supplemental lighting as well will probably be required. But with that being said, you could be growing lettuce, spinach, kale, stuff like that throughout the winter. Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. We have another couple of quick questions in chat that just popped up. You mentioned biosoil earlier. Is that effective at all against voles?
So Biosol is a organic granular fertilizer. The only place to get it that I know of up here is Neil's Lunsford, and you do have to buy a 50-pound bag, which will last a while. But it is supposedly not only gonna feed your garden, but also work as a pest deterrent, repellent. Is it 100% effective? No, but maybe with the use of that fertilizer and a couple other things, again, unfortunately with the voles, nothing is quite 100%, but it doesn't hurt to use that fertilizer. You're going to be feeding your garden every month. Why not use one that also kind of smells terrible, just to warn. It's made from mushrooms, and I mean, I wouldn't want to hang out in it either, but it is a great option. I think the only deterrent for the home gardener is it's only available in a 50-pound bag.
Okay. Another quick question. Can I grow foxglove in Breckenridge?
Yeah, I mean, again, when you're looking at your digitalis or your foxglove varieties, some will probably say, zone 6, 7, avoid those. If they say 3, 4, 5, it'd be worth a shot. There are certain varieties of foxglove that are biennials. We didn't really touch on that today. They're a little bit trickier. They do not bloom every year. It's more of an every other season life cycle. But if I were to grow them, I would want to give them a little bit extra protection, maybe against, a rock wall or somewhere where it's collecting a little bit more heat and protection in the winter. That is kind of on the fringe of being like a successful plant here, or maybe one that you're trying just for fun. But it is
Okay.
possible.
One last question popped up. Do you have to apply the bioswale again after a heavy rain?
Good question. Water certainly helps with any of these granular fertilizers to get them in the soil and kind of help break them down. But I would just stick to that once a month schedule. So I would actually try and plan it right before a good rain or before your irrigation or watering cycle. But again, overfeeding is almost worse than not feeding at all. So just about once a month. And again, the rain is breaking it down, but the voles are still kind of smelling it and eating it and not liking it. So hopefully.
Okay. We're running a bit over here, but I didn't want to cut anyone off from the possibility of asking a question. Does anyone else have? All right. So we do have another question in chat. Can you just show up to the Summit County landfill for compost?
Yes, you can. Just be aware of their, hours. I believe right now you have to be out by 4 p.m. Some services run later, but you could always call. But yes, anyone can show up right at the window, tell them you're there for compost. If you have your own buckets and bins, they'll just direct you to a pile. You do have to load them up yourself, so bring a shovel or there'll be one there. Otherwise, if you have a truck, even better, they'll just load you right up and weigh you and send you on your way. But it's open for everybody, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Does anyone else have a question they want to unmute themselves and ask? I am not seeing anyone unmuting. Well, Susan does say the landfill is open on Saturday, but it's closed on Sunday.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of Summit Seniors, thank you so much to everyone for participating and in this session. And Alyse, thank you so much. That was so fantastic. There's so much great information there. We really appreciate you putting on this session. Everyone, we will eventually send out something via email so that you'll be able to see the links to the slides, but they are in chat right now if you want to go ahead and pull them out. So thank you, Alyse, very much. What I'm going to do is go ahead and pause the recording.